Hey, ma'am, can I talk to you for a
You've
moment?
been talking to me since I got here, officer. I'm on my way inside for a hearing.
Understood. Just need to confirm you cleared security and you have
It's
identification.
in my bag. Happy to show it, but
We'll
I'd
keep
rather
it
not
quick.
stand.
It was 7:58 a.m. on the stone steps of a federal courthouse. The air was still cool, carrying the faint scent of coffee from a cart across the street. The city was just waking up. Clerks crossed the plaza with folders tucked under their arms. Attorneys checked their watches, adjusting ties as they moved through the security line. The courthouse doors opened and closed in a steady, familiar rhythm. A black woman walked toward the steps alone. She carried a leather briefcase in her left hand. Her heels clicked softly against the marble, measured and unhurried. There was nothing rushed about her pace, nothing uncertain. Just the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. "Ma'am, step back." The voice cut through the morning air, sharp and sudden. "You're not authorized to be here." The woman stopped mid-step. She turned slowly, her posture straight, her expression calm. "I am authorized," she said. "I have court this morning." The officer stepped closer, positioning himself between her and the entrance. One hand rested near his belt, the other open, signaling command. "This area is restricted," he said. "You need to step aside." Traffic hummed behind them. A bus hissed at the curb. Somewhere nearby, a phone chimed with a calendar alert. The world kept moving, unaware that something was already going wrong. "I'm entering the building to hear oral arguments." The woman replied evenly. "You can verify that with security." The officer shook his head, his tone tightening. "No, you don't look like counsel. ID. Now." For the first time, a few heads turned. A clerk exiting the building slowed her pace. Two junior attorneys paused near the railing, sensing the tension, but not yet understanding it. The woman reached into her bag carefully, deliberately. She knew this moment. She knew how quickly a misunderstanding could become something else. She handed over her identification. The officer barely glanced at it before handing it back. "This doesn't mean anything to me," he said. "You're loitering on federal property." The words hung in the air, unnecessary, loaded, final. The woman met his eyes. "Sir," she said calmly, "you are making a mistake." Neither of them knew it yet. But on those courthouse steps, at that exact moment, the law had already been crossed. The officer did not step back. Instead, he shifted his weight, widening his stance as if anchoring himself to the ground. His voice grew firmer, louder, carrying with it the certainty of someone used to being obeyed. "I asked you to step aside," he said. "This area is restricted." The woman took a slow breath, steady and controlled. "I am entering a public federal building during business hours," she replied. "You can confirm my identity with courthouse security." He shook his head again, more sharply this time. "You people need to follow instructions like everyone else." The words landed hard, sharp enough to be heard by the people now lingering nearby. A clerk paused completely at the top of the steps. Two junior attorneys exchanged glances. Someone across the plaza lifted a phone, angling it discreetly in their direction. The woman did not react to the comment. She had learned long ago which battles were worth engaging and which were traps. "I'm asking you to verify my credentials," she said. "Nothing more." The officer extended his hand again. "ID. Now." She reached into her briefcase slowly, deliberately, making sure every movement was visible. The leather creaked softly as she withdrew a card and placed it into his palm. He looked at it for less than a second. "This doesn't mean anything to me," he said flatly, handing it back. You don't belong here. Traffic continued to roll past behind them. The courthouse doors swung open and shut as staff passed through metal detectors. Glancing briefly at the growing tension before moving on, I am scheduled to be inside this building at 9 o'clock. The woman said, If you delay me, you are interfering with judicial proceedings. That was the moment his posture changed. He stepped closer, his voice lowering, tightening. You're interfering right now. Step aside. The crowd had grown by inches. Whispers rippled outward. Is this really happening, right here? The woman stood her ground, her briefcase still at her side, her voice unwavering. Sir, she said quietly, you are escalating this without cause. The officer's jaw tightened. He had stopped listening, and the morning, once ordinary and quiet, was no longer either. The officer stared at her for a long second, then let out a short, humorless laugh. Don't lie to me, he said. Judges don't show up dressed like that. The words landed heavier than his raised voice. The woman glanced down briefly at herself. A simple gray blazer, dark slacks, low heels, no robe, no badge on a lanyard, no security detail at her shoulder. Just a woman standing on courthouse steps with a briefcase and a schedule to keep. I am scheduled to hear United States versus Palmer at 9 o'clock, she said calmly. Courtroom 3. If you delay me, you are interfering with judicial proceedings. The officer stepped closer, invading the small space between them. You're interfering right now, he said. Turn around. A murmur spread through the small crowd. Someone whispered. Is he serious? Another voice answered. This can't be real. The woman did not raise her voice. She did not step back. She stood perfectly still, eyes locked on his, already understanding that logic had left the conversation. I am a judge of this court, she said again, slower this time. You can confirm that with the clerk's office or judicial security. The officer shook his head. Anyone can say that. He reached for his radio, hesitated, then dropped his hand. The moment stretched. Phones were no longer hidden now. People leaned subtly to get a clearer view. You are detaining me without reasonable suspicion, the woman said quietly. Every second of this is being observed. The officer's jaw tightened. His hand moved to his cuffs. The sound of metal echoed sharply against the stone steps. Gasps rippled through the crowd. At a courthouse, in daylight, in front of witnesses, the building behind them stood silent and unmoving. A monument to law and order as the line between authority and abuse vanished in plain sight. And with one small, irreversible motion, the officer committed to a mistake that would not stay contained on those steps. The cuffs closed with a sharp metallic click. The sound cut through the plaza, louder than it should have been, echoing off stone and glass. For a brief moment, the morning seemed to freeze. A woman near the railing covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another voice followed, quieter, stunned. This is insane. The woman did not resist. She did not raise her hands in panic or argue further. She simply turned as instructed, her shoulders straight, her movements controlled. The officer guided her away from the courthouse steps toward the glass entrance, firm but not rough. Certain now that he had asserted control, phones were fully raised. No one pretended anymore. Inside the doors, the temperature dropped instantly. The noise of the street faded, replaced by the low hum of scanners, footsteps, and fluorescent lights. Security personnel froze mid-task, confusion spreading across their faces as they registered what they were seeing. The woman walked steadily, the cuffs glinting under the harsh interior lighting. "Please note the time," she said calmly, as they crossed the threshold. 8:05 a.m. Federal Courthouse entrance. The officer did not respond. They moved through a side corridor reserved for security incidents. The walls were lined with framed photographs of past judges, black and white portraits, stern faces in robes. Nearly all of them white. Nearly all of them male. The irony was impossible to miss. At the end of the hall, a door closed behind them with a soft, heavy thud. A windowless room. A desk bolted to the floor. 2 molded plastic chairs. A camera in the corner blinking red. "Sit," the officer said. She complied without hesitation. Her briefcase was placed just out of reach. The cuffs rested against her wrists, already tightening as the metal settled. Silence filled the room. Thick and unnatural. For the first time since the confrontation began, the courthouse felt small, and somewhere just beyond those walls, the morning continued, unaware that justice had already been delayed by prejudice. The woman sitting in that small security room was Judge Eleanor Brooks, but she had not always walked through doors made of marble. Decades earlier, she had stood in very different lines outside overcrowded classrooms. Outside courtrooms where she was not yet allowed to speak. Outside offices where doors closed gently but firmly in her face. She was the daughter of a postal worker and a hospital orderly. Raised in a Baltimore neighborhood where opportunity was something you studied for at night. She earned scholarships. She worked double shifts at the campus library. She graduated at the top of her class, then went on to law school, where she learned early that excellence did not guarantee belonging. She clerked for judges who mispronounced her name but relied on her research. She carried boxes of briefs down long hallways, absorbing how power moved quietly through institutions. She became a federal prosecutor because she believed the law was supposed to protect people like her parents. She tried corruption cases, civil rights violations, police misconduct. She cross-examined officers who swore nothing was wrong, while video told a different story. She never raised her voice in court. She didn't need to. She let facts do the damage. When she was nominated to the U.S. of T.M. Circuit Court of Appeals, the confirmation hearings lasted 3 days. Senators questioned her temperament, her impartiality, her ability to separate empathy from law. She answered calmly. She cited precedent. She cited statute. She quoted the Constitution from memory. The headlines called it a historic appointment. The subtext was clearer. She would always be watched, always questioned, always expected to prove again that she belonged. That morning, she had arrived the same way she always did. Early. Alone. Carrying her own briefcase. She believed justice should not need an escort. And now, in a room built to restrain, she understood with quiet certainty that everything that had shaped her life had led to this moment, not of anger, but of record. The man who stopped her that morning had his own history, one far less examined. Officer Daniel Reeves had worked courthouse security for 9 years. He was hired young, fresh from a regional police academy that praised vigilance and presence. His early evaluations described him as proactive, confident, and assertive. They also included quieter notes. Escalates minor encounters. Needs improvement in judgment. Difficulty with discretion. There had been complaints. A public defender once questioned why Reeves demanded identification from her client, but not from others standing nearby. A janitorial supervisor filed a report after being stopped twice in 1 week while contractors passed freely. Each complaint was logged, reviewed, closed. No body cameras, no witnesses willing to escalate, no discipline. Reeves learned what worked. Confidence, volume, Control. He learned that stopping first and verifying later rarely carried consequences. Supervisors wanted no incidents. To him, that meant preventing anything that felt out of place before it became a problem. He trusted instinct over protocol. That morning, his shift began at 7:30 a.m. He was briefed about increased security due to a high-profile hearing. Remain alert. Challenge unfamiliar faces. Maintain perimeter integrity. The language was broad. The discretion was his. When he saw Judge Brooks approaching alone, no badge visible, no entourage, no recognition reflex, something clicked in his mind. She did not match his internal picture of authority. And for the first time in his career, instinct was about to cost him everything. Inside the security office, time stretched. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. Officer Reeves stood near the door, arms crossed, avoiding Judge Brooks' eyes. She sat upright in the molded plastic chair, her cuffed hands resting calmly in her lap. For the first time since the encounter began, silence filled the space. "You can still fix this," she said quietly. "Call your supervisor. Verify my identity." Reeves did not answer right away. Outside the room, footsteps hurried past. Voices overlapped. The normal rhythm of the courthouse was breaking. A knock came at the door. Soft at first, then louder. Reeves didn't move. He pulled out a notepad, then hesitated, unsure what to write. The certainty he had carried on the steps had thinned, replaced by something unfamiliar: doubt. Through the thin walls, words began to cut through the air. Judge. Circuit. She's on the docket. Reeves stiffened. He glanced at the blinking red camera in the corner of the room. For the first time, he seemed aware that this moment was no longer private, that his authority now had an audience. "You're delaying security operations," he said finally, his voice less certain than before. "Sit tight." The phrase landed wrong in a room built to restrain. Judge Brooks closed her eyes briefly, not in fear, but in calculation. Time. Location. Witnesses. Failure to verify credentials. Unlawful detention. She had assembled outlines like this her entire career. Outside, the knocking came again, harder this time. And somewhere in the courthouse, the balance of power was already beginning to shift. The door opened abruptly. A senior security supervisor stepped into the room, his eyes moving instantly to the handcuffs. The color drained from his face before anyone said a word. "What is going on here?" he asked. Reeves spoke quickly, defensively. Suspicious individual refused to comply. Claimed to be a judge. The supervisor didn't answer him. He looked directly at the woman in the chair. Judge Brooks met his gaze, calm and unmistakable. "Yes," she said evenly. "You know who I am." The supervisor inhaled slowly, already reaching for his radio. His posture changed, shoulders squared. Voice lowered. "We have a problem," he said into the receiver. "A serious one." Reeves took a step back, the ground shifting beneath him. The certainty that had carried him through the morning began to crack. Moments later, the door opened again. A man in a dark suit entered, his badge clipped neatly at his waist. The chief marshal. He took one look at the cuffs and then at Reeves. His expression hardened. "Remove them," he said. "Now." Reeves hesitated just long enough to register fear, then knelt and unlocked the cuffs. The metal released with a muted click. Judge Brooks flexed her wrists slowly. Deep red impressions had already formed. "I apologize, Judge Brooks," the chief marshal said quietly. "This should not have happened." She stood, adjusting her blazer, smoothing the fabric with deliberate care as if restoring order to something larger than clothing. "Please note the time," she said. 8:21 a.m. The room was silent, and in that silence, the truth settled. The mistake was no longer reversible, only accountable. Judge Brooks did not linger. She picked up her briefcase, held it firmly now, and walked back into the corridor. Staff instinctively moved aside. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. No one needed to be told what had just happened. The hallway felt different, quieter, heavier. Inside the courtroom, the hearing began as scheduled. Judge Brooks took her seat on the bench. Her questions precise, her rulings measured. To anyone who hadn't been outside that morning, nothing appeared out of place except the faint red marks still visible on her wrists when she adjusted her papers. Outside the courtroom, everything was already moving. Security footage was flagged and preserved before noon. Written statements were requested. Supervisors made calls to offices that rarely heard bad news before lunchtime. By early afternoon, the chief judge had been briefed. By mid-afternoon, the administrative office of the courts requested a full report. And by evening, Officer Daniel Reeves was placed on administrative leave before his shift officially ended. The story did not stay internal for long. The next morning, a 30-second video appeared online. No commentary, no captions, just a uniformed officer blocking a black woman at a courthouse entrance. Raised voices, authority asserted, and then the unmistakable sound of handcuffs closing. Within hours, it was everywhere. Legal blogs dissected it first, then national outlets, then social media, where outrage traveled faster than context ever could. A U.R. Circuit Court judge detained at her own courthouse. By noon, the clip had crossed 1 million views. By nightfall, it had tripled. And with every replay, the question grew louder. How could this happen right here? From a legal standpoint, what happened that morning was not complicated. Under the Fourth Amendment, a detention requires reasonable suspicion, specific, articulable facts that a crime has been committed or is about to be committed. Not a feeling, not an instinct, not an impression. Officer Reeves had none. Judge Brooks was walking into a public federal building during normal business hours. She was carrying a briefcase. She was following routine procedure. There was no criminal behavior to point to, no threat articulated, no lawful basis to stop her. The moment she presented identification, the obligation became even clearer. Federal security protocol requires verification, not dismissal. Refusing to verify credentials and escalating instead transforms a stop into an unlawful detention. Adding handcuffs completes the violation. Courts have been explicit on this point for decades. Handcuffs are not a neutral action. They are a seizure. They require justification. Reeves had none that could survive even minimal scrutiny. Authority does not excuse error. It amplifies responsibility. But the legal failure was only one layer. The deeper issue was bias, not shouted, not confessed, but quietly decisive. The assumption that authority must look a certain way. That power wears a uniform, carries a badge, or arrives with an escort. When those expectations are not met, doubt creeps in. Doubt becomes suspicion. Suspicion becomes action. This is how bias operates most effectively, not through hatred, but through certainty without evidence. And that certainty, on those courthouse steps, had overridden the law itself. The investigation moved quickly. Officer Reeves was interviewed twice. The first time, he cited confusion. The second time, he cited instinct. Neither explanation survived the footage. Neither survived the witnesses. Neither survived the timeline. His prior complaints were reopened this time, under scrutiny that had never existed before. Patterns that had once been ignored were now impossible to deny. 3 weeks later, the findings were released. Reeves had violated protocol. He had failed to verify credentials. He had escalated without cause. He had detained a federal judge based on appearance rather than evidence. The conclusion was unambiguous. He was terminated the same day. The settlement followed quietly. There was no admission of wrongdoing. Only a figure large enough to carry meaning. Judge Brooks directed the funds toward judicial education programs and civil rights training initiatives. She did not keep a dollar. Inside the courthouse system, changes followed. Mandatory credential verification procedures were revised. De-escalation training was updated. Immediate supervisor notification became required for any detention involving court personnel. The footage was added to training materials. Law schools discussed it in constitutional law seminars, not as a scandal but as a lesson. Because what happened that morning was not an anomaly. It was a system finally forced to look at itself. Judge Brooks returned to her routine. Early mornings. Heavy dockets. Carefully written opinions. She did not give interviews. She did not hold press conferences. She let the record speak for itself. But something had changed. The courthouse steps where it happened felt different now. Officers paused longer. Credentials were verified more carefully. Assumptions were no longer made as casually as before. The idea that authority had a single look had been challenged at the very door sworn to protect justice. What happened on those steps was not complicated from a legal standpoint. It only felt complicated because authority was involved. Under the law. Being calm does not make a stop lawful. Being respectful does not cure a violation. Compliance does not transform suspicion into fact. The Constitution does not bend for confidence, uniforms, or instinct. Judge Brooks never raised her voice. She never resisted. She followed every instruction even when those instructions were wrong. Justice came later. Not because she was powerful, but because the violation was documented, witnessed, and impossible to deny. That is the final truth of this story. If he was all-wizened. Circuit court judge can be detained at her own courthouse. Credentials ignored and authority dismissed. Then position alone is not protection. Knowledge alone is not armor. What protects people are procedures, accountability, and eyes willing to record. The courthouse still stands. The steps are still there. People walk them every morning. The difference now is that more people are watching. Because justice is not about who you think belongs. It is about whether the law is followed, especially when no one expects consequences. And that morning, on those courthouse steps, the law did exactly what it was designed to do. Eventually,